Thank you, Mike. It's great to be back with you and have the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and that is Louisiana and why we are the way we are. And if you saw the title of the talk today, it's Heismans, Huey, and History. So I'm going to talk a lot about sports and Huey Long's intersection with sports and LSU, and then a little bit about the comparison between Huey and another public figure of the day today, how they've been alike about 100 years different. I want to start, though, by showing you, and I hope some of you have seen the documentary that we did with LPB a couple of years ago. We hope to be doing another one in the not-too-distant future. But I want to show you the first 2 minutes of the documentary because it'll set the stage for why I've crafted the talk I have today about Louisiana's role in so many different things that are important in America. So this is the first 2 minutes of the documentary, Why Louisiana Ain't Mississippi or Anyplace Else.
Louisiana is a human gumbo that exists nowhere else in America. Its founding predates the 13 colonies, and its diversity comes from its European and African roots that gave rise to its existence more than 5 centuries ago, when New Orleans, not Ellis Island, not any other port, was the gateway to the New World. It's the culture, stupid. Yes, James, it's the culture that makes us different. There's an exuberance here. A joie de vivre, a love of life mixed with the denominations. Unlike other southern states, almost a third of us are Catholic.
That's why we have parishes, not counties.
As a state holiday, we spell our words differently. Our food is spicy. The Holy Trinity has a double meaning. Our civil laws are based on the Napoleonic Code. We have drive-through daiquiri shops, and there's no ethnic majority. 40% of us are white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, 32% are African American, and 28% are everything else: French, Spanish, Creole, and Cajun. This is the story of our disproportionate contribution to America's music, art, sports, history, and politics, none of which would be possible without the mighty river that empties into the Gulf of Mexico through just one state, ours. It's why Louisiana ain't Mississippi or any place else.
So you heard in there talking about our disproportionate contribution to all things Americana. And that is so true. Louisiana punches above its weight when it comes to influencing music in America, art in America, politics in America, and certainly sports in America. And I want to focus on sports today because we're all sports fans. We all love LSU, and I want to talk about the intersection of sports and LSU and Huey Long, how that played out. But to do that, I have to start by giving you a little history. And to do that, we have to go back to the early 1920s or to the mid-1920s. Huey Long runs for governor and is unsuccessful in 1924, but he comes back in 1928 and gets elected governor of Louisiana. You think about his name and his influence on Louisiana and on American politics, it lasted a scant 7 years, less than 2 terms by conventional political thinking. He's elected governor in 1928. He's elected to the United States Senate in 1930. He doesn't take the oath of office to be a senator until 1932. During that 2-year period, his letterhead literally said, Huey P. Long, governor and senator-elect. And he died in a hail of bullets in 1935 at the Capitol that he built. 7 years that forever changed the landscape of our politics. And numbers also play into the history and the background of Huey Long. There are more than 20 books written about his life and his death. And many more that talk about the history of Louisiana and don't focus just on Huey Long. He also authored 2 books, which I'll mention in a little bit. But what is particularly interesting about the ongoing legacy of Huey Long and the Long family is that until 2022, there had been a Long family member holding state or federal office in Louisiana for 72 consecutive years. That ended when Gerald Long left the Louisiana State Senate. That number is pretty interesting because Louisiana was founded and named by a Frenchman who was serving King Louis XIV, thus Louisiana, Louis's land, Louis's realm. King Louis XIV served for 72 years as well. When he died, all of his children had predeceased him. The only heir to the throne was his 5-year-old grandson. Now, a 5-year-old can't rule a country. Well, maybe a 5-year-old could rule a country. Well, a 5-year-old couldn't rule a country back then, and so a regent was appointed to do his job for him. But that 72-year period is pretty interesting that it connects the namesake of Louisiana and the person who's probably most identified with Louisiana and certainly with Louisiana politics. So Huey Long's involvement with LSU. He's governor from 1928 to 1932 and a United States Senator beyond that. He had basically 2 residences. His second residence was the Roosevelt Hotel in New Orleans, where he befriended the band leader at the hotel, whose name was Castro Carrazzo. He convinced him to come be the band leader at LSU. And Huey and Castro wrote 2 songs together. One was The Darling of LSU, and the other one you know very well. It's called Touchdown for LSU. You may not know the words to Touchdown for LSU, but you hear it at the beginning of every game when the Tiger Band marches onto the field with those 4 notes, dun, 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 I hold that tiger, that then morphs into the song that Huey Long wrote called Touchdown for LSU. So he had a huge interest in making LSU much greater than it was at the time he took office. And he funded LSU at a level that had not been seen before. He wanted LSU Stadium to expand. The only way the stadium could expand was to pass a bill in the legislature to build a dormitory. And that's why Tiger Stadium used to have dorm rooms that students lived in. And some of you may have lived there for a while as you went to LSU. But the reason that happened was because Huey wanted that stadium expanded for his football team. But the only way to do that was to build a dormitory and attach a football stadium to it. So the expansion happened because of his getting money in the legislature to make that happen. But his involvement went much more than that. He hired LSU's football coach in 1930, and I say he hired because he hired him. And then he told the Board of Supervisors who he had hired. The guy's name was Russ Cohen, who was hired in 1930 to coach the Tigers. He made it for a couple of years and had some degree of success, but in 1932, Huey announced before the last game of the year that Russ Cohen was being fired. Again, Huey announced that Russ Cohen was being fired. He was incensed by that, and he got the team fired up, and the team was playing Tulane in the last game of the year, and they didn't win the game, but it was a moral victory because Tulane was a real powerhouse back then, and we almost beat them. And Huey relented after that performance and decided that Russ Cohen would not be fired, and he made it for another 2 years at LSU. But 2 years later, while Huey was a United States Senator in 1934, Russ Cohen took the count. So we need a new football coach. So Huey, of course, is going to be integrally involved in that selection. And he was assisted in that endeavor by soon-to-be General Troy Middleton, who was then the Commandant of the Corps of Cadets at LSU. And Colonel Middleton knew of a guy named Biff Jones, who had been a great running back and coach at Army. And he convinced Huey that this was the right guy for the job, and Huey hired Biff Jones to be the coach. Now, meanwhile, Russ Cohen had left LSU and gone to Vanderbilt, where he had played ball. Biff contacted Russ about taking the job at LSU, and Russ assured him that because Huey Long was now in the Senate and was not governor, he wouldn't have to worry about any meddling by Huey. And so Biff was convinced that that was a fair deal, and so he took the job. And he did pretty well for a while. But in 1934, which was a very significant year that I'll talk about a little more in a minute, 1934, LSU was trailing in its last game of the year against Oregon, trailing 13-0 at halftime, and Huey marched down to the locker room during halftime and insisted on speaking to the team, which he had done during the Russ Cohen days. He was allowed to speak to the team. Huey wanted to speak to the team at halftime. They're down 13-0. He's got to fire them up. And Biff Jones stood in the doorway and said, "No, you're not coming in here. I'm the only person that speaks to my team at halftime." And Huey's response was, "You better win this game." And Biff Jones's response, "It doesn't matter win, lose, or draw, I quit." And Biff Jones quit. After LSU came back and beat Tulane 14-13 in the second half, but he had enough of Huey Long because he took the job on the premise that there would be no meddling by Huey. And Huey did pretty good for a while, but by the time 1934 rolled around, he couldn't take it anymore, and that was the end of that relationship. Now, that 1934 year was pretty significant as it relates to LSU and Huey, because the first game of the year was against SMU, and I see LSU is going to be playing SMU in a home and away series in a couple of years, which is great. The ticket sales were kind of slow for the opening game against SMU, and there was a lot of buildup about the Tigers' season that year. We thought we'd be very good, and Huey was concerned, and he realized the problem was nobody was buying tickets because the circus was coming to town. And so Huey got on the phone and called John Ringling of the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. Supposedly this happened. I'm not sure this is exactly correct, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And he told Mr. Ringling that he needed to move the circus to New Orleans or some other venue on that Saturday because the Tigers were playing SMU. And he politely said, "No, we're having a circus. It's going to be in Baton Rouge on Saturday night." And Huey asked him, "Well, you know, we've got a law in Louisiana that all animals that come into the state have to be dipped. They have to be treated for insects and pests and other problems." And he said, "Mr. Ringling, have you ever dipped a tiger or an elephant?" And he thought for a moment and said, "We'll be in New Orleans on that Saturday night." Now, Bob Mann has written a relatively new book called Kingfish U, which I recommend to you. But in that book, Bob dispels that notion. He did some research and said the circus was not coming to town on that weekend, and so that may have been just an apocryphal story that was told about Huey, but it's certainly an interesting one nonetheless. So also in 1934, and this is a classic, J.Y. Sanders was the congressman who represented the Baton Rouge area. I'm sorry, he was a senator who represented the Baton Rouge area, and he got elected to the United States Congress. And so there was a vacancy for the Senate representing most of South Baton Rouge, a district I formerly represented, as a matter of fact. And Huey thought it would be cute to go to the campus at LSU and get the student body all together in the amphitheater and announce that he was going to appoint Abe Michael to be the next senator from taking Mr. Sanders' place. And the big crowd of students gathered, and he announced it was going to be Abe Michael. Now, Abe Michael was a star running back for the Tigers at the time. He was not a Louisiana resident. He was a Mississippi resident, problem number one. Problem number two, he was not of age to join the Senate based upon the law at the time. And number three, he didn't want to be in the Senate. He was a football player. He learned that he had been appointed while the Tigers were at some kind of away game. It was meant to be a joke, but it was taken very seriously and became a huge national issue. And of course, it never happened. He never took the job, and everybody got all bent out of shape about it, but it got the attention of Will Rogers. Will Rogers said this: "Huey Long is trying to make senators out of our football players. He better be trying to make something out of our senators. I don't blame the boy for not wanting to be demoted." And as a result of that episode, it led to one of the most infamous episodes in Huey's tenure in LSU history that's known as the Reveille 7. All about the freedom of the press and censorship, because there had been a letter to the editor of the Reveille written that was denigrating Huey Long. And Huey found out about it before it was published, and he didn't want it published, and it was a big to-do. And the university leadership at the time wound up expelling 7 journalism students from the LSU School of Journalism, including the editor of the Reveille, all because of what Huey said. Of course, they denied that was the reason, but nonetheless, these 7 journalists wound up getting free tuition at the University of Missouri, a great journalism school, and all graduated from the University of Missouri and not LSU because they stood by their principles and would not agree to that censorship. And that's the famous story of the Reveille 7. And Huey's comments at that time when he found out about it, and this is a direct quote, at least I've seen it in quote in 2 books: "This is my university, and I'm not going to stand for any criticism from anybody out there." That was the way Huey kind of felt about those things. So you can see His involvement with LSU was very significant on a positive way, but also on a negative way, which was kind of the way Huey Long operated. From the moment of his election, we no longer had Republicans and Democrats, blacks and whites, Northerners and Southerners, liberals, conservatives. We had longs and anti-longs. You were with him or you were against him. You were rewarded or you were punished. And that's kind of the way things went. And I'll mention a little bit more about that in a minute. But let me shift gears a little bit and talk about the disproportionate impact our state has in the sporting world, and particularly on football. Louisiana and Mississippi go back and forth as to which state has the most players per capita in the National Football League. It's been that way for years. Louisiana has produced NFL caliber players. LSU has done that, but so have other institutions. The College Coach of the Year award is called the Eddie Robinson Trophy. Eddie Robinson was a coach at Grambling State University, won 408 games, and sent more than 200 players to the National Football League. He did something that nobody else will ever do, I don't believe. He had one job for one employer and one wife for 55 years. And that's the legacy he left, and the Coach of the Year is named in his honor, a Louisiana native born in Baton Rouge. And I mentioned the Heisman in the title of this talk because I want to talk about the Heisman Trophy and the impact that Louisiana has had on that. There have been 80 Heisman Trophy winners since the inception of the award in 1935. California, Ohio, Texas, and Pennsylvania are the top states that have birthed ultimate Heisman Trophy winners. There's a significant drop-off after that number, and 12 states, including Louisiana, have between 6 and 2 Heisman Trophy winners born in their state. Now, Louisiana has the first Heisman Trophy winner from our state was John David Crow, 1957, from Spring Hill, Louisiana, the northwestern part of the state. Billy Cannon was not born in Louisiana. He was born in Mississippi, but he only lived there for a brief period of time and moved to Louisiana. We count him as our own, but he technically was not born here, but he's our second winner. Devontae Smith from Amite City, now in the NFL, won it fairly recently in 1923. And as we know, we have Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels, kind of adopted sons that have gone to LSU, which is significant because LSU is tied for 5th among all schools in America with the number of Heisman Trophy winners, Cannon, Burrow, and Daniels. But the most interesting thing that makes us Heisman worthy compared to any other state, even on a per capita basis or just on a straight numeral basis, we have had 4 Heisman Trophy runners-up born in Louisiana. Hank Laricella in 1951 from New Orleans played for Tennessee, finished second to Dick Kazmaier in that year's voting. Jerry Stovall from West Monroe in 1962, as we all know, certainly should have won the Heisman Trophy. I remember I was about 8 years old at the time, and I was incensed that some guy named Terry Baker from Oregon won the Heisman Trophy. But at that point in time, in 1962, only one Southerner had won the Heisman Trophy in all of its history. I think there was a little regional bias going on at that point. Marshall Faulk from New Orleans and San Diego State was the runner-up to Desmond Howard in 1991, and Peyton Manning from Tennessee in 1992 lost out to Charles Woodson. Billy Cannon was third in 1958, won it in 1959, so no other state has that combination of winners and second-place finishers, particularly based upon our size. And our size, by the way, we're about 25th in the country in overall population. So when you look at things on a per capita basis, we're not at the bottom, we're about in the middle, but again, we've got this disproportionate impact on what we do. We think of Louisiana as being a football state, but in reality, we can make a pretty good argument that we are a basketball state, and I'll tell you why. And this was in the documentary, if you saw the documentary. And this is perhaps the most significant sporting fact, I think, about Louisiana punching above its weight. I will take my starting lineup of Louisiana-born players and put them on the court against any other state in America. You pick your best 5, I'll pick my best 5, put a couple of guys on the bench, and let's play and let's see what happens. This is the starting lineup that we could craft from Louisiana if we never left I-20 in North Louisiana. If we just went across the top part of Louisiana, this is who we could put on the field. Bill Russell, born in Monroe, moved to California as a 10-year-old. Carl Malone from Summerfield, Elvin Hayes from Rayville, Willis Reed from Bernice, and Robert Parrish from Shreveport. Now, off the bench, we could bring Bob Pettit, pretty good player from Baton Rouge High School and here in Baton Rouge, or Clyde Drexler, Houston Rocket from New Orleans, or Joe Dumars, point guard from Natchitoches. That's a pretty good 8. We could round out a second team if we added Avery Johnson from New Orleans and a guy named Louis Dunbar. Louis Dunbar from Minden was the successor to Meadowlark Lemon as the clown prince of basketball with the Harlem Globetrotters. So that's a pretty good lineup. And what makes it most significant is that the first 7 players that I mentioned are all part of the NBA's all-time 75-year anniversary team. 7 Louisiana players out of 75 players, the greatest in NBA history. That's a pretty good lineup right there. And that doesn't count Pete or Shaq, who basically have identity with Louisiana, though they weren't born here, so we can't really claim them. But the other feature that supports the argument that we're a basketball state, the all-time leading scorer in prep basketball history in America is a guy named Greg Prosell, who played for Ebarb, a little tiny community in the western part of the state in the early 70s. He is #1 all-time scorer in high school basketball history. 3 of the top 10 are from Louisiana, and 11 of the top 25 are from Louisiana. And this isn't my calculations. This is a national prep outfit that keeps up with this stuff. So you've got an incredible number of Louisiana athletes whose names we don't recognize that in their 4-year high school careers scored more than anybody else in America. And you think about the wealth of talent basketball-wise across this country and realize at the high school level we do pretty well. If we needed to rustle up a coach, well, we could look to 2 women to coach that all-star team. Edna Tarbutton from Little Baskin, Louisiana, won 218 consecutive games as the coach of the Baskin High School girls team back in the 30s and 40s. And a young lady named Kim Mulkey, who we all know has won national championships at every level, a player, an assistant coach, and a coach, could coach that team. Can you imagine if a governor wanted to speak to her team at halftime? We'd have to call out the National Guard. All right, so circling back from a history standpoint, Huey was in power from the late 1920s and early 1930s. You fast forward almost 100 years, and you find another politician that has the same traits that we saw in Huey Long. And obviously, I'm talking about our current president. There are at least 10 factors, I think, that you can look at and say there has been no other politician in American history that rises to a level equal to that of Donald Trump in the way he has influenced American politics. And I'll give you the reasons why I would make this argument. Number 1, they both harbored presidential ambitions. Huey's came at a very early age. In fact, one of the Long family members said that when a Long is born in Winfield, they put him down on a little blanket, and if they point toward Baton Rouge, they're going to run for governor. Donald Trump's political ambitions may have existed long ago, but they only manifested themselves when he was a grown man and had a huge success in the business world. But they both had, obviously, presidential ambitions. One accomplished it, one wanted to, but didn't. Secondly, both of these guys had an ability to arouse the masses. They were salesmen. Huey had been a patent medicine salesman. He sold a product called Codaline and another product called Wine of Cardui, which was for women's menstrual cramps. But he was very good at it as a patent medicine salesman. Donald Trump, a pretty good salesman as well. They both had different speaking styles. Huey was a lot more flamboyant, a lot more eloquent. Donald Trump, very plain spoken, but can communicate to voters, and people listen, and people believe that plain talk. Thirdly, the cult of personality that exists, the celebrity status that exists. Huey Long was a national figure when he lost his life in 1935. He got more mail than the President of the United States as a United States Senator. People knew who he was, and he wanted it that way. He had built a plan called Share Our Wealth Society. The Share Our Wealth Society was designed to redistribute wealth in America. Does this sound familiar in the political discourse of today? He wanted to take from the rich and give to the poor. He was a champion of the little guy. And Donald Trump, of course, celebrity status as the apprentice and as this billionaire businessman from New York, both had a celebrity status as they embarked on their political careers. Fourth, they both had a slogan. Huey's slogan was "Every man a king." He wanted to make every man a king, based upon the philosophy of a populist, William Jennings Bryan, who ran for president of the United States at the turn of the previous century, who gave a speech where he said he didn't want to get crucified on a cross of gold. He wanted to move America to the silver standard, not the gold standard, because it would be easier for the little guy to get by. In this speech that he gave that was very famous, he said that he looked forward to a day in America where every man would be a king, but no man would wear a crown. And that's where Huey picked up on the slogan that he made famous, his campaign slogan, his theme song, the title of his autobiography, "Every Man a King." Donald Trump had MAGA, Make America Great Again. Everybody identifies that now with him, and it's his identity. They're both populists as a practical matter. Huey, as I just mentioned, was a populist based on William Jennings Bryan and redistributing wealth. He's in the early 1930s, mid-1930s, on the heels of the Depression. He's telling America he wants to redistribute wealth. That's a pretty strong message to Americans who had just come off of the Depression. And Donald Trump has redefined the Republican Party to be a populist party, not the party that it's typically been thought of. Next, they were both ruthless. We know that. They punished their political enemies. Huey had something called the deduct box, where he deducted pay from every state worker. 10% of their paycheck went to the deduct box. That money was used to support the political campaigns of Huey's allies. He insisted there was no coercion involved. He said, and this is a direct quote, "We make them pay it voluntarily." But they did. And he also said, "If people get in my way, I dynamite them out the way." That's the way he handled his business. That's the way he got things done. We know about Donald Trump's proclivities for wanting to punish his enemies. They were both masters of nicknames and used them in a very good, clever political way. Huey ran against a United States senator when he got elected named Joseph Ransdell, who kind of looked like Colonel Sanders. He had a mustache, a little goatee, and Huey called him Old Feather Duster. And old J.Y. Sanders, who I mentioned, he called him Old Buzzard Back because he was kind of hunched over a little bit. He called the mayor of New Orleans, Sims Walmsley, Turkey Head. He called, when he was in Washington, he called the Secretary of the Interior, who was Harold Ickes, the Chinch Bug of Chicago. And he had names for everybody in the Roosevelt administration that he was attacking. And we all know about Pocahontas and Little Marco and Sleepy Joe and Rocket Man, and using nicknames effectively from a political standpoint has benefited them quite a bit. So let me find the next example. They both believe in expanding executive power. When Huey was elected governor and called a special session of the legislature, one of the few members of the House of Representatives that opposed him threw a copy of the state constitution at him. "Governor, have you read this?" He picked it up, looked at it, tossed it aside, and said, "From now on, I am the Constitution." And that's kind of the way things went for a little while. He said he could own state legislators he could buy them like a sack of potatoes. And he controlled his successor, O.K. Allen, who was governor when he was in the United States Senate, but Huey was actually the de facto governor. O.K. Allen did whatever Huey said. They said that O.K. was so agreeable that if a leaf blew in and landed on his desk, he'd sign it. And we know about Donald Trump's desire to expand executive power. It's being tested, ultimately will be tested in the courts. I would just say this, with the power we have in Congress right now with Steve Scalise, Mike Johnson, if Canada becomes a state, it ought to be named North Louisiana. They also authored their own manifests. Huey wrote a second book that was very presumptuously entitled My First Days in the White House. And it outlined what he would do as President of the United States about redistributing wealth and co-opting all the industrial leaders of the day to be members of his cabinet. That was his manifesto. Donald Trump, the art of the deal. He told everybody how to make things work, how to make things happen. And finally, they both created their own media. Huey was so incensed by the way that he was treated by the Times-Picayune and the Advocate that he created his own newspaper called the Louisiana Progress, which was distributed just as if it were a daily newspaper. And he controlled, and his supporters controlled what went in it. Donald Trump communicates with us via Truth Social, right? His own way of communicating in the new age of communication. So these two guys lived 100 years apart, but I think the analogies are very real. If you look at both of their careers and the things that they have been able to accomplish and the criticism that they have both drawn as a result of their political foes and the people who are concerned about the manner in which they went about their business.